How is everybody? Good? So, I got a little confession to make. Hopefully you won't make fun of me too bad. But when I was a kid, I was terrified of storms. Right? Any kind of a storm, anytime like we were watching TV or whatever, and that little weather radar would blip across the screen, and it says, for the counties of Lancaster and Madison, all that. But please take shelter. You guys have a tornado watch or a tornado warning or a thunderstorm warning or, whatever. And I would just get scared because storms would cause me to ask all kinds of questions. And that wasn't, anything really not typical. I was always asking tons of questions. When I was a freshman running cross country, I asked so many questions that my coach, Coach Quick, he assigned one of the seniors on the team, whose name was Josh, to answer all of my questions. So like whenever I had a question, Josh had to answer it. I don't even know what all I was asking. But anyway, whenever these storms would come up, I would just ask tons of questions like, what's going to happen if the power goes out? Or what's going to happen if the house catches on fire? What's going to happen if it's a tornado? What's going to happen if this? Or what's going to happen if it's in the middle of the night and we don't know and the house gets struck by lightning and we all die? And like just these crazy questions. Storms make us ask questions. And it got so bad, like I couldn't even watch The Wizard of Oz with my family because that scene at the beginning with the tornado, even though my cousin told me, Brandon, it's just a sheet that they're spinning around, like it's not a real tornado, like it just freaked me out. And eventually I kind of grew out of it, mostly. But on another storm, on a different day, I asked a different question. On May 22nd, 2011, I went through a storm that caused me to ask, is this it? Am I going to die? Because I was in Joplin, Missouri. We got some pictures that we can flash across the screen here. But we lived in Joplin at the time. Amber had just graduated from college from Missouri Southern State University the day before that, so we still had lots of family in town. And my grandparents were with us. They're from southern Indiana. They'd come up to see Amber graduate. And Amber's 5 months pregnant with Addie at the time. And before my grandparents went home, they were supposed to go home that afternoon. They wanted to get us a rocking chair for the baby. So we went to this Ashley Furniture Home store there in Joplin on about Rangeline and 20th, if you've ever been to Joplin. And we're picking out a rocking chair, and it's taking forever. We get the chair. My grandpa wants to get us this ottoman to go with the rocking chair. And they're looking for what seems like hours, and like they just can't find this ottoman in their system, in their database. So we're saying, it's okay, Grandpa. We'll just get this chair. We'll just go. So finally, we talk them into that. We order the chair. We're going to pick it up later. And we notice when we go outside that the sky's kind of weird. There's some storm warnings going on. Like it's Joplin. It storms all the time. Everybody always, kind of ignores the tornado warnings because they happen all the time. And everybody says, Joplin's protected in this little bubble. It always goes off of 44 or whatever the road is. It never hits Joplin. So we kind of don't pay attention to things. And there's a Sonic and there's a Pizza Hut right outside of this furniture store where we were. And my grandpa, they don't have a ton of Sonics where they are. And he said, hey, why don't we go to that Sonic here? And normally, I'm all about eating good food. So normally, I'd say, yeah, let's do that. And for one of the only times in my life, I can only credit this to God, I had the weirdest feeling, like, you don't want to go to that Sonic. And I said, how about we go eat later? Let's go to the bookstore. That's a few blocks north of where we are. And let's go there. And normally, my wife would veto that because me in a bookstore is like some of you ladies in like the Pioneer Woman aisle at Walmart. Like you're there all day. And so, but she said, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's go to Books A Million. So we do that. And as soon as we walk in the door, pretty much, the sirens start going crazy. We start hearing stuff banging all over the building. The managers in the Books A Million, they hunker us in the back, and we're there with everybody. And people are freaking out on their phones, like, "Hey, where's my kids? I gotta make sure my kids are safe." Some people are praying. Like, there's a lady who was a nurse at Mercy, St. John's at the time, and she's like, "Hey, I'm getting calls from my workers saying that there's bodies everywhere. Like, I don't know what's going on." And all I know is stuff's banging around us. The last text message I was able to send out to a friend of mine was, I don't know what's going on. All I hear is banging around us. And then I don't know how long we're in this store. Could have been half an hour, could have been an hour. I don't know how long it was. But I know that when we got out of the store had lost power and we couldn't stay in there anymore, so they kicked us out. And we walked out the doors, and we just looked, and there was nothing. There was nothing. It looked like a bomb had went off across the whole town. We tried to go back to our house where we were living at the time, and traffic's just backed up forever, and you got people coming up to your car saying, hey, I can't find my kids. I can't find my 2-year-old. I can't find my 5-year-old. There's people bloody everywhere. It's bad. Storms make you ask all kinds of questions. The questions then were like, one, am I going to die? What's going on here? Stuff's banging around us. We don't know what's going on. We can't talk to anybody because the phone signals are dead. That's the only time in my life where I wondered that if I was going to die or not. I thought, man, I don't even know if I'm going to get to see my kid. She's 5 months pregnant. I don't know if we're getting out of here. And 162 people did lose their lives that day. But storms, they just make you ask all kinds of questions like, how in the world is a town going to recover from this? The disciples asked some questions during a storm. And that's what I want to look at this morning, because good news and bad news. Bad news is following Jesus doesn't make us immune to going through storms. Good news is that he goes through them with us. So if you got your Bibles this morning, we're going to be in Mark chapter 4. Starting in verse 35, you can turn there. Let's look at this storm. Verse 35, it says, that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was, in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? They were terrified and asked each other, Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Let me give you a little bit of context here. Jesus has just finished a lot of teaching. He's been teaching pretty much nonstop for a while. For this whole day, he's been teaching, giving a lot of parables. There's tons of people that are crowding around him. We've talked before about how crowds come everywhere Jesus goes, expecting to be healed and wanting to hear what kind of crazy things he's going to say. And this day is no different. He teaches. He's got to teach in a boat in the water because so many people are crowding him, and there's some other boats around him. And he just can't get away from people. And so to escape the crowd, he's got to go to the other side of the lake, of the Sea of Galilee. And number one, he goes to the other side, yes, to get away from the crowd. But two, as we're going to look at next week, he's got kind of a divine appointment over there on the shore of the other side of the lake. And Jesus is tired. He's exhausted. He's worn out from all the teaching he's been doing, from all the healing he's been doing, from all the casting out demons of people that he's been doing. He's worn out. And so they get in the boat, and as soon as the boat starts going across the sea, Jesus falls asleep. And I don't know about you, but when I read that, when I read that Jesus falls asleep on a cushion in the boat, there's something kind of intimate in that, I think. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but sleeping is the most vulnerable thing you and I can do. Because when we fall asleep, man, anybody can just come up and attack us, or a storm can come up and we don't know about it. To sleep is to fully put yourself in the trust of God. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. I heard somebody talk about that when I was in college, And I kind of put it in the back of my mind, and then it came back to me as I was reading this. And I started agreeing with that. And here you have Jesus, fully God, we've talked about, but here you see him at his most human. And I might be wrong here. I didn't research this, but from my recollection, I think this is the only record that we have of Jesus sleeping in the Gospels. It's here in this boat after a long day. And a storm comes up. Somewhere in the middle of them going the 7 miles across the Sea of Galilee, this bad storm just comes out of nowhere. And if you know anything about the geography of that area, that's not all that uncommon for the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee sits about 700 miles below the sea level. And you've got all these mountains kind of forming around it. And then when the cool air from the mountains meets the warm air that comes up off of the surface of the water, any meteorologist can tell you that's a recipe for a good little storm. And so storms are pretty common on the Sea of Galilee. What's not common on the Sea of Galilee is for some people in this boat who used to be professional fishermen to be terrified. Like that's not common. You know you probably got a bad storm when you've got professional fishermen that are scared out of their minds. But have you ever been in a storm? Maybe you've been in a boat fishing or whatever, and a storm comes up, or maybe, like me, you've ridden out a tornado or whatever. Have you ever been in a storm? Storms lead to questions. Oh, what's going to happen if this happens? What's going to happen if we can't do this? What happens if, a tree falls on the car? What happens when the power goes out? Whatever. Storms lead to questions. And what I want to do this morning is I want to look at 3 questions in this text that Jesus and the disciples asked, and then I want to look at another question that's not from this text. So, first question. Teacher, don't you care if we're going to drown? Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown? Like, we're going to die here. Do you not care? How can you sleep? The storm doesn't wake Jesus up. Like, the dude must have been tired. You got waves coming over the boat, like people are getting wet, the wind is howling like crazy, and he's just, snoring away. I assume he was snoring. But so the storm doesn't wake him up, but the disciples do. Because they're terrified, they're panicking. And we're no different. We may not ask Jesus, do you care if I drown? But we ask some other questions like, Jesus, do you care about this medical test that I have coming up? Jesus, do you care that they just diagnosed me with cancer? Jesus, do you care, that my dad has a tumor? Jesus, do you care that I'm all out of money and we got a lot of month left? Like, Jesus, do you care that everybody hates me? Like, Jesus, do you care? Do you see what's going on? Are you going to do something about it? See, the question kind of betrayed what they were thinking in their hearts. They were thinking, we trust you, Jesus. We've seen some pretty neat stuff with you. But we only trust you to a certain extent. Like, we trust you on the shore while you're teaching and you're doing all the miracles, but out here in the boat on the sea that's kind of choppy and we're about tipsy-turvy and we're about to drown, like, we don't necessarily trust you then. Like, you need to get back to the shore. Like, they trusted him just only so far as they could see. You trust him until the waves start crashing over the boat. And until the diagnosis comes in. Until the car breaks down. Until things get hard. We'll trust you on the calm water, but not necessarily on the rough sea. In other words, we're going to trust you, Jesus, until we have a reason not to trust you. So my question is, how far does your faith go? How far does your faith go? When the waters start getting a little rough, when the boat's tipping, like how far does your faith go? Before you cry out, like, Jesus, don't you care that fill in the blank? I love the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You can read it in Daniel chapter 3. I'll summarize it here, but you probably know the story. There are these 3 former Hebrews who get taken into captivity into Babylon, and they're serving King Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar makes this big idol of gold, crazy-looking thing, and he commands when the music starts that everybody bow down and worship it. And you got these three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they're faithful Israelites. They know that you don't bow down to other gods, and so they refuse to do it. So this makes the king mad. He calls them in a couple times and kind of threatens them, says, hey, if you guys don't bow down to this thing when you hear the music play, you're going to get thrown in the fire, and who's going to save you then? And I love their response in Daniel 3. You can read it in verses 16 through 18. And because it shows their faith and how far it goes. They say, King, we're not going to bow down to this idol. We serve a God who, even if you throw us in the fire, he's able to deliver us. But I love this. It says, even if he doesn't deliver us, we're not going to bow down and worship this idol that you've made. Like, how far does your faith go? And you know the story. Like, they get thrown in there, and they don't burn up. Like, the people who throw them in there burn up. They die. But the three of them, they're in there, and the king looks in there, and he sees another figure who I believe is the pre-incarnate Jesus. And he's like, hey, didn't we throw three people in there? Why is there four in there? And one looks like a son of the gods. And I love that story because it shows you, hey, we're going to trust in the good. Yeah, when God protects us, but even if he doesn't, we still know who God is and we know who we are. And our circumstances don't change our faith. See, God is definitely able to protect us in a storm. That's true in the Old Testament. It's true in the New Testament. But it's never about the storm. It's never about the miracle. The point of the miracles is always what the miracles point to. And we'll get to what this one points to here in just a minute. But Jesus wakes up. He gets up. He stands up from where he was sleeping in the boat. And he completely rebukes the wind and he rebukes the waves. And the sea goes completely calm. The wind stops. It goes from being crazy to being completely calm and completely still. Kind of like a mirror on the sea. See, some believe that the devil conjured up this storm. I don't know if that's necessarily true. They think, oh, this is the devil trying to stop Jesus from his mission. So he's going to try to drown him and the disciples. I think it's just an unlucky day to go across the sea. So the first question is, teacher, don't you care if we drown? Second question Jesus asks of the disciples. He says, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? On one hand, his question makes sense. But on the other hand, it doesn't make any sense at all. We'll start with the latter hand. It's like, what do you mean, why are they so afraid? Like, you got waves crashing over the boat, the wind's going crazy, the boat's about to capsize, they're about to drown. It makes sense to be afraid. Like, you'd be nuts if you weren't afraid. But then on the other hand, they're with Jesus. Right there in the boat is Jesus. I mean, think of all the things that they'd seen up to this point. They'd seen him cast demons out of people. They'd seen him heal the sick. Just before this, they'd seen him raise somebody from the dead. Like, Jesus is in the boat with them, and they're terrified of a freak storm. See, his presence should have been enough to keep their fear at bay. The fact that he was in the boat with them should have given them some assurance that nothing's going to go wrong while he's there with them. See, the trick is to not get lost in the miracle and completely lose what Jesus was saying. Like, they shouldn't have needed the miracle to know that Jesus would have taken care of them. And what he rebukes is their lack of faith in him. But the miracle leads them to another question. And it's this. They ask Jesus now. Or they ask each other, rather. They said, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Who is this? See, they were afraid of the storm before. When everything's going crazy and they thought they're going to drown, they were pretty afraid. But now the text says that they're terrified. They were afraid of the storm, but they're terrified of Jesus. That's not a word that you expect to see in relation to Jesus, if we're honest. Most paintings that we see of Jesus, Jesus is carrying like the lamb on his shoulder, or he's playing with the kids, or it's like peaceful Jesus, happy Jesus, hippie Jesus. Not terrifying Jesus. Like it says they were afraid of the storm, but now, once Jesus calmed it, they were terrified of him. See, what's happening in the Gospels as you read them, Jesus is slowly and methodically revealing his identity to his disciples. In the same way and in the same time, the Gospel writers are slowly and methodically revealing the identity of Jesus to us as the readers. And Jesus has got a thing with showing Peter who he is in boats. If you remember, this is the second kind of encounter that Peter's had with Jesus in a boat. And when they see Jesus calm the storm and they're terrified, they start going, who in the world is this? Who is in the boat with us? Man, even the wind, even the waves obey him. We've seen crazy things before, but this guy can control the weather. Like, who is this? And they knew their Old Testament. They knew that God alone had power over the wind and over the waves. You look at Psalm 89:9, and it says, you rule over the surging seas. When its waves mount up, you still them. Even more in Psalm 107, it says this, starting at verse 23, it says, some went out to the sea on ships. They were merchants on the mighty waters. They saw the works of the Lord, his wonderful deeds in the deep. For he spoke and stirred up a tempest that lifted high the waves. They mounted up to the heavens and went down to the depths. In their peril, their courage melted away. They reeled and staggered like drunkards. They were at their wits' end. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. They were glad when it grew calm, and he guided them to their desired haven. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. Now, in not so many words, Jesus has just revealed himself as God to the disciples, and they were terrified. They knew who they were, and they're starting to clearly see who he is. And that thought terrified them. Like, we are in the boat with God. See, a true encounter with Jesus should lead us to a healthy awe and a healthy fear of the Lord. Not an unhealthy fear. There is such a thing. When you're constantly afraid of God, like, oh, God's going to smite me if I do this. God's going to strike me down. God's going to do this. Like, no, there's a such thing as an unhealthy fear of God. That leads you into, like kind of a guilty religious complex. But Proverbs 1:7 says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and knowledge. So you want to be wise? Have a fear of the Lord. Have a healthy awe of him and healthy respect of him. It's kind of like, what's our position? How do we act when we're praying? I mean, do we realize when we're praying, we are talking to the God of the universe, the person who created all of this and each of us? Do we realize that? Or do we kind of, I fall asleep, I forgot to pray, let me pray before I fall asleep, or kind of half falling asleep while we pray? Or do we actually set some time aside and say, hey, I'm going to meet with the King of the universe today. I'm going to set aside time. I'm going to turn my phone off. Nothing is getting in the way of that because I'm talking to God and it's just too important. Or kind of, do we recognize who God is in the way we treat each other? Because Scripture says you can't love God without loving people. That's the two greatest commandments. There's a line in Les Mis that I love in the epilogue. If you've seen it, but Jean Valjean, he's dying and he's getting ready to go to heaven. The theology of all this is beside the point. But there's an angel talking with him, and they're singing, and the last real line of the musical is to love another person is to see the face of God. And I love that line because it lines right up with Scripture. How we treat each other says more about how we feel about God than anything else we can do. Do you have a healthy fear and a healthy respect of God? And there's one last question that I want to ask from outside of this text. And it's from Luke 6:46. And I don't know who this is for this morning, but as I was studying for this text, I was reading through Luke, and I was reading through some of this, and I kept reading this question, and it kept popping up in my mind. It deals with the identity of Jesus also. But it says, the question is this: why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and then not do what I say? I said, I don't know who that's for this morning. Maybe it's just for me. The Gospels have purposely shown so far that everything obeys Jesus without question. You get demons coming out. None of the demons are like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to stay right here. I'm comfortable. I got me a couch here. I got the TV. Like, we're not going anywhere. No, they come out. They might talk a little bit, but they come out. Sickness. There's no disease that Jesus couldn't heal. It's not like the germs were like, no, we're happy here. We're going to stay here. We're going to continue to make this person miserable. No, when Jesus says that a person's healed, the person's healed. The weather, when it doesn't matter what's going on the sea, when Jesus rebukes it, it calms down. Even death, the most powerful force that we've never been able to stop, at a word of Jesus, people get up out of the grave and they walk. Nothing gets to say no to Jesus except us. You ever thought about that? Like, everything obeys Jesus without question. We are the only things that get to decide whether or not we're going to obey. I started thinking about this week, and it was just kind of a crazy thought to me. Now, one day, ultimately, we're all going to obey. Kind of have a deferred obedience if we don't obey now. But everything else in nature, without question, when God says to do something, it obeys. And yet we have the free will to not. At least for right now. Like I said, I don't know who this question's for this morning. I don't know if somebody's in here struggling with knowing they're supposed to be doing something, they're not doing it. I don't know. But why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? Either call me Lord and do what I say, or don't call me Lord. The one thing that would help me when I was a kid going through storms and being terrified of them is I'd lay in my bed at night, if it was during the night, and I had a neighbor kid that I really didn't care for who lived across the field. And he picked on me on the bus and all this stuff. And I started rationalizing during the storm. His name was David. And I said, if we got a really loud thunderclap or something, or lightning was really bright, I'd say, it's okay. David is getting this storm too. You know, and David is probably laying in his bed terrified right now too. And I'd start to, what I realized is that I'm going to be okay because I'm not alone. Neighbors getting this storm too. Parents are hearing this storm. Everybody's hearing this storm in this area. It's not just me. I'm not going through this by myself. All I needed to know was that I wasn't alone. That's the whole point of this story. The point's not the miracle. It's not the calming of the sea. The point of the story is that Jesus is God. And if you follow Jesus, he's in the boat with you. That's the whole point of this story. It doesn't mean, and I've heard some sermons where people get up there and they're like, Jesus calmed this storm, and Jesus can calm all the storms in your life. He can calm the storms in your marriage. He can calm the storms in your health. He can calm the storms at your job. That's not the point of this story. The point of the story is that he's going to go through the storms with you. And that storms with Jesus are a lot better than storms without Jesus. I mean, could he calm all those storms? Sure. If he wanted to, he's God. He's got the power to. But that's never the point. A miracle, by definition, is an exception to the natural. See, Jesus never shied away from the storms in his life. He didn't shy away from the cross. None of the disciples shied away from the storms, except one of them. They're all martyred. Thing is, if you read this book and you just start from the beginning and you go to the end, like, you'd never come up with that. like, man, if I follow Jesus, nothing bad's ever going to happen. No, that's not what it says. The point is that he's God and that he's in the boat with you, whatever storms that you may go through. There was a friend of mine I had in high school, and she was in my youth group, and her dad got cancer. He was one of the elders or the deacons at the church, I don't remember which, but he was one of the church leaders. And he got cancer, and it was terminal, and he ended up passing away after I'd moved away, and I'm reading this on Facebook. But she was recounting one of the last conversations that she had with her dad, and she's talking to him about praying for healing and all of this stuff, and he kind of looks at her and says, Jenna, either way, whether I get healed or whether I die, I win. Either way, because if I die, I get to go be with Jesus right now. If Jesus miraculously heals me here, yeah, I get to be here, a little bit longer, and then eventually I'll die and go be with Jesus. But either way, I win. Either way, God's in the boat with me. And because Jesus is in the boat with me, that's enough to go through whatever storm that I'm going to go through. Let's pray.